Because I'm Carlos Podcast, episode 35. Now, I've named this one The Calm Before the Storm, and we're going to talk a little bit about the National. And just to lead off this, if you're familiar with my YouTube channel, because that's the hub where everything is that I'm not going to the National. But I do want to touch on a couple of things related to it at the end. And this time around, for a change of pace, a quaint idea, I actually have a little bit of an agenda on this one. So I'm going to go through a couple of different things. But the last segment will be talking about the National and a couple of things related to that. Specifically, though, as far as the first agenda, I do want to make a couple of updates on the YouTube channel, the aforementioned YouTube channel, specifically talking about a couple of things that might wind up there and also some stuff that actually was there previously. So as far as things that are going to wind up there, I actually got the notification earlier today that the ComC shipping that I had put through has actually been shipped out, and now I've got the tracking number. But based on the way that we're approaching the middle of the week, I wouldn't expect to see that until next week, which is perfectly fine because on the channel right now, my last mail day from Ship My Cards, I actually ended up recording it and it took over 30 minutes. So it's already on the YouTube channel. I'll leave a link to that in the description if you do want to check that out. I had a lot of fun with it. It ended up going for over 30 minutes that I was recording that particular one, with a big emphasis on the Josh Rosen project that I had mentioned previously on it. Now, before you ask, I am perfectly aware that I'm lighting my money on fire, but it is intentional and I am having a lot of fun with it, to be perfectly honest. But the ComC order is also going to have a fair number of Josh Rosen cards, but in addition, some wrestling cards, some stuff I actually had graded on through ComC with their CGC, previously CSG affiliation, which now they've expanded upon, and I've talked about that on the YouTube channel as well, which is great. Now you can do PSA cards through there, and I already did a video talking about that. There are some use cases where I think it makes sense, but not necessarily for everybody, but more options is better. Now you can pick PSA or you can pick CGC, and it just depends on what your circumstances are and what you want to do. Now, also speaking about the channel, I would also kind of draw your attention if for whatever reason you're on the YouTube channel and you didn't see it. I had a nice conversation this past week with 90s B-Ball Cards, Jake Roy, and we had a lot of fun having a great conversation, kind of staying away from main topics that normally you would expect if you are familiar with his YouTube channel. We didn't really talk about 90s cards that much, although we did dabble in the discussion a little bit as far as that's concerned. We didn't really talk about basketball cards either. So it's one of those things that we stayed out of a lot of the expected lanes and also barely touched on the National. I made a little joke of it and kind of did a little short version. Obviously, this one I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, but at the same time also made a lot of references to things outside of the normal areas that are his bread and butter, because he actually has some long form content on his channel pertaining to the National. Obviously, the channel name is 90s B-Ball Cards, and we didn't really delve into that too much. We did talk about player collecting and a couple of things related to that as well, but a big crux of the conversation focused kind of on content and some things related to that, and that's always a conversation that I enjoy having with other folks that do make either videos or podcasts or whatever the case is in the space. So that was a lot of fun as far as that conversation is concerned. I'll leave a link to that in the description for you if you want to check it out. I had a lot of fun with that one, certainly, and Jake was a great guy to have a nice conversation with me. Now, the last piece pertaining to kind of a PC kind of thing is me crossing my fingers, because tonight I set a snipe on an auction that I'm waiting on at eBay. So I'm not going to jinx it by saying too much, but I will say that by the end of the week I'll know the results. So I'm crossing my fingers and hoping I can add something. It should be if I am successful, it will be a nice piece for my wrestling collection, which is coming together quite well. I'll probably do a little video of showcase and stuff of some of the cards that I've picked up as far as that's concerned. But I've been definitely picking up some stuff. It's been a nice category for me to play around with a fair bit, because I do enjoy jumping back and forth between different projects. It allows me to avoid burnout and a lot of the associated elements to it. I've never really experienced burnout as far as collecting is concerned, because I don't allow myself to get too far down one single rabbit hole, and I kind of bounce around a little bit. But I've tried to focus over the years the amount of projects that I have, but I do give myself a lot of latitude to be able to jump around a little bit from the different ones, so that I still feel like I'm making progress on a lot of these things. But by not focusing too much, not putting too much tunnel vision on just one, it allows you to look up once in a while and see opportunities when they present themselves. So that's kind of the area that I've focused on. I've got some set building projects, I've got some PC player collections, but one of the key things for me is I want to go where the opportunities are. If something is maybe being a little bit too expensive and I'm not too happy with the selection available, then instead of just trying to push a square peg into a round hole, then you just back off for a little bit, look around and see maybe there's another opportunity in one of the other projects you're working on. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for here. I've made a lot of really good progress on some of those collections, and I'll definitely get a chance later on to talk about them a little bit more. So I'm crossing my fingers. Hopefully by the end of the week I'll have an answer on that. Now let's do one newsy type topic. See, this is what happens when you've got a little bit of an agenda, a little bit of a format on one of these podcast episodes. I want to talk about a tweet, and it's still a tweet technically, even though Twitter has been renamed to X or something. I don't even want to get into that. But anyway, either way, I avoided Twitter, X. I don't even barely use my account other than to read something when someone else decides to use it. You know, I would love to get off this platform forever, but for now, here it is. And I'll leave a link to this particular tweet in the description if you want to check it out yourself. So it's from Darren Rovell, and he was posting over the weekend. So this was on Sunday night that he posted that PWCC employees say that the new owner, Fanatics, so I talked previously on the YouTube channel about Fanatics purchasing PWCC to add another one of the Infinity Stones to their plans, has informed the company via memo that PWCC founder and CEO Brent Huigens, I'm going to go with Huigens, even though I probably butchered that, has exited. From the memo, as a reminder, we are focused on doing business the right way. We are committed to operating with the highest level of integrity and a strong ethical framework. Now, that's a very fun quote that I heard, I believe, Wax Museum podcast kind of mentioned. The fun way, that was almost like a backhanded shot at Brent Huigens there, as far as that's concerned. And if you are familiar with kind of the history of PWCC and Brent Huigens and some of the allegations and things that they've been accused of as far as that's concerned, it's not surprising that something like that would be included, but it is kind of funny that it would be included in a memo talking about his exit and kind of making sure to emphasize that piece. Again, assuming that was in the memo. I'm going to go off that assumption because Darren Rovell included it in here as a quote, but we'll have to see. I'd love to see that full memo if it ever becomes fully leaked out, because I'd love to read the whole thing from front to back. Regardless, I'll include a little mention here at the end of the tweet. He puts, my take. Given the litany of issues over the last couple of years with Huigens, kind of what I was referring to a moment ago, this is a smart move for Fanatics. As they acquire, they are cleaning up the hobby. Now, the last part is a bit of speculation and kind of interjecting his own commentary into this one by adding the cleaning up the hobby piece. I'm going to disagree. And part of the reason is that I'm just looking at Fanatics in kind of the moves that they have made over the course of time and kind of the moves that we anticipate that they're going to make. And it's something that I talk about on the YouTube channel and on the live streams and stuff quite a bit. I have to look at Fanatics as being kind of a ruthless competitor in the space. If nothing else, they've shown that they are willing to take advantage of opportunities, let's put it that way. When the PWCC acquisition came in, even though them getting a platform fit perfectly in line with kind of the plan and strategy that they had kind of laid out as far as being an end-to-end, so it made a lot of sense, PWCC wasn't necessarily potentially the first choice that a lot of people would have thought of. It was a choice, it was a possibility, but I think the circumstances of PWCC having that financial arm, having those potential, bad assets, bad loans, so to speak, that they had as part of their financial instrument structure, the fact that they had allowed people to borrow money on collateral with sports cards, the fact that these sports cards had gone down in value past the point that any margin that they had built into it, now all of a sudden, even if you were able to sell off the items in basically what would amount to a fire sale, you would be actually losing money. So the person that borrowed it would actually be better off saying, yeah, go ahead, auction it off, you keep it, keep the collateral. Because at that point, it's actually worth less to them than the money that they had already received previously. Very similar, again, using the comparison to what happened during the financial crisis in 2008. I won't relitigate the whole thing for you, but one of the key elements to it was that a lot of those bad loans, so to speak, basically people defaulted on them because they weren't able to pay them or were not willing to. It was a situation where they looked at the situation where the item that was the collateral for the loan was now worth less than the actual loan itself. So it's a situation where they felt it was better just to abandon the loan, so to speak, and abandon the collateral. In that case, they threw the keys back at the lenders and said, yeah, keep the house. I don't need it. I'd rather not have to deal with the payments that are associated to it, because at that point it would make less sense for me to pay you back than it is for you to just take the collateral and whatever, and I'll take the credit hit, so to speak. And when PWCC kind of delved themselves into those murky waters, they were not in a position where the acquisition of them by Fanatics was necessarily happening from a position of strength. PWCC was in a position of great weakness. It was closer to a bailout. And when it's closer to a bailout, then you kind of take what you can get. So because of that, it doesn't surprise me that part of what Fanatics would do coming into it, because they weren't necessarily identifying PWCC, but just seized on an opportunity, it means two things. It means you don't immediately make waves by, eliminating all the brain trust on day one. But we're no longer on day one. We've had a little bit of time for them to look in, and we have to remember, the brain trust, including the CEO, was one of the decision makers that led them down the path that put them in that position of weakness that allowed Fanatics to acquire them in the first place. So we got to kind of bear that in mind. And the other piece of the puzzle, and this is where I say Darren Rovell was trying to interject a little bit. He was being very generous in his interpretation because he's saying, clean up the hobby. Here's the truth. I believe that Fanatics is a business, and I believe that they operate with ruthless efficiency in a lot of things. And I believe that regardless of, the shady past and regardless of a lot of the things that Brent has been accused of, I think if he had brought enough value or had enough connections or some proprietary knowledge that Fanatics had felt was more useful than the liability he was bringing to the table with that past, he would still be the CEO right now. I think it's a situation where they're looking at the lay of the land. They're saying, this person is a liability. They're not bringing anything special to the table that we really need going forward. I'd like to install my own people. And then we'll just make it, we'll make it like mutually parted ways. We'll give them a little bit of a graceful exit, but at the same time include a kind of a snarky comment in the memo, which I kind of appreciated. I kind of enjoyed that. But regardless, my interpretation of it is really comes down to a business looking at the situation and saying that we don't actually need this person that badly. So now that we've taken care of the acquisition and now we're going to go our own way, we may as well start decoupling parts of the past that don't serve us anymore and people that made decisions that got them in a position that allowed us to acquire them in the first place. So that's just my angle, just my opinion, just my thoughts on that general piece I wanted to chat on a little bit. I'm sure we'll have a little bit more time to discuss it on the Friday live stream, so we'll see if anybody wants to discuss that. But that's my general high-level take. Again, we may learn more in the coming days, but just on the surface with what I'm looking at, it seems like a business decision that makes perfect sense. I really don't think that Brent brought anything to the table that they needed, that they would have needed to keep him around for. But I also don't think it was cleaning up the hobby. I don't think it was cleaning up the company at all. I think it's just they looked at it and said they wanted to insert their own people into a spot, which is 100% the prerogative when they buy a company that way, especially under those circumstances. All right, that leaves us with the last topic, which is the one that I based the title off of, the calm before the storm. And the reason why I wanted to call it that is because I've already started to see, I don't know if you've seen on your YouTube or podcast feed or whatever the case is, if you follow hobby content, we already had in the weeks leading up to it a lot of the pre-national preparation videos, the infamous wear comfortable shoes bit. But we had a lot of that already. But now leading into this week, now we were kind of at 0 hour, and I already started seeing on my YouTube recommendeds and as far as podcasts and things, people that did some pre-records, but also some people that were starting to do a couple of, day zero vlogs is the way they were kind of phrased today. Because today was the day that I'm recording on Tuesday that they had actually started assembling some of the displays. A lot of that stuff was already underway, but now you were actually starting to see some of the build out of what actually is going to comprise a lot of the booths at the National. It's not an official day because the show hasn't actually opened. That's going to happen tomorrow. But at this point, a lot of the structure is already starting to be built out, and some of the dealers were actually ready with some inventory to actually be able to sell. So a couple of the folks that were doing those day zero vlogs were actually able to do a couple of those deals. And probably some dealers were walking around making some deals with some of the other ones. Some people are still setting up, but you were already starting to see as people did a couple of walkthroughs, people that got a chance to walk in with the dealers, you were starting to see some of the pieces start to be put together. And that's what I mean about the content. It is still the calm before the storm because we're only getting a handful for now. And then I think starting tomorrow, we're really going to start getting the avalanche of various types of content. So today we got the walkthroughs, we got maybe people doing a handful of deals, people getting a chance to walk the show floor because they added another 200,000 square feet is my understanding. So you got a chance to see them kind of show you the sheer depth and size of the space that's gonna house all these people over the next 4 or 5 days. So it's going to be very interesting to see all the way through the weekend how a lot of this ends up looking, what people's varying experiences are in the various days, which day ends up being the busiest day. Do they do a record number of people through the door? They've got all this additional space, all this additional corporate infrastructure. We've got a bunch of third-party graders that are going to be doing on-site grading. What are those lines going to look like? So I think there's going to be a lot of stories coming out of it, including any other potential announcements. We had a couple different announcements leading into it, but now the question is going to be, are there going to be any announcements at the show itself as the industry kind of gets together in this gathering in what is effectively the biggest trade show that the hobby has to offer? Obviously, there is the section for the collectors and everything, but there is, of course, the heavy corporate presence, which makes it into its own kind of thing. Now, I did mention already that I'm not going to be there. It's something that does make a lot of sense for me, and it's something that I've talked to with some folks as that time has gone on. The National itself becomes less and less appealing to somebody like me, given the logistics and the various costs associated to it. It's something that I just don't see the value in it for me. I strictly speak only for myself. However, I am a person who loves to consume a lot of that content because for me, it's still very interesting to see the interplay of the way that the collectors interpret it, the way that the industry people interpret it. And I have the good fortune now at this point, I do have a lot of folks that I can kind of talk to get different perspectives on these different segments. And you do get very different interpretations of the same things that happen at these shows because of that. Some people like to attend the trade shows, some people don't. Some people are more interested in the corporate presence, trying to get the giveaways in that. Some people don't care about that. Some people are involved in the industry itself, so obviously their perception is completely different than the layman walking in the front door who specifically wants to go and Target and try to get some cards. Some people are going to find a lot of ease in terms of finding certain types of cards. Some people are going to be very frustrated, either with prices or selection. So we're going to get a lot of these stories that are going to be coming out as far as that is concerned. And we're going to have the big content creators pumping out a lot of content, but we're also going to have some regular folks making their own vlogs and giving their own perception, what they picked up, what they experienced, how their show experience went into it, and stuff like that. I enjoy it. but it's going to be a deluge of it. It's going to be very interesting to see the sheer volume, I think, of content in terms of social media posts, YouTube, and lives of all different types and varieties. And I think we're going to be interested to see. That's why I say it's the calm before the storm, because we're going to get a big wave of content that is going to be available. Now, for a lot of people, that will be super overwhelming. And if you're not interested in it and don't want to see it, well, then you might want to kind of avert your eyes for the next several days, as the hobby very much goes heavy duty on the national content. However, from my channel's perspective and the way I'm going to approach this, as I mentioned, I know different folks that are going to be there and are going to comprise some of these different groups. So I'm going to be in contact with them, kind of seeing the lay of the land in that. And if the opportunity presents itself, I will try to either in a live format or maybe record something that I can put on the channel as the days go by and they give their interpretations of some of the different days. I'll try to get some of that. And if I can include it in the channel, I will. That's kind of my plan, one thing that I'd like to do. And on the Friday live stream, we're going to proceed as planned. However, if any of them are able to join in part of the conversation and give their perception from there as the weekend approaches, I'd love to include that as well, but I'm not going to assume it. It's one of those things where once you're in the middle of it, it's really tough to kind of plan something like that out, because you might be going out to have dinner, you might be going out to have drinks, you might be going out to hang out with some folks. There could be a lot of extracurricular activities happening. It's one of those things that you can't assume anything, but if people are available to have a chat and join in for a little bit, we'll definitely try to include that as part of what we're going to do. So those are some plans, hopefully, for the next couple of days on the channel. Nothing is concrete, so I don't want to promise too much, but it'll be something that'll be a lot of fun. I know for sure, though, that I'll definitely be enjoying kind of absorbing and watching a lot of the content and listening to it and getting a lot of these different perspectives, because we're going to get another temperature gauge on the hobby at this stage, because we talk about the different confluence of forces. Prices going down, but at the same time, a lot of foot traffic, a lot of these shows leading into it. There is deals being made. There is traffic. There is money changing hands. There are cards being bought, but it's going to be the price. It's going to be what is available. It's going to be a lot of these other different elements that are all coming together. So we're going to see if that makes it for a very buying heavy show, or if it ends up being one of those ones where the story coming out of it is that a lot of people weren't being flexible and weren't moving it, and the stuff just wasn't getting around the room. Those are the questions that we're going to get answers to over the next several days. And that's what it's kind of stuff like that is interesting for somebody like me that enjoys watching it from that perspective. But I'm also not surprised, and I'm also not bothered that for some folks, they're just not interested, or maybe they have a lot of FOMO and, it's checking out that kind of thing just, makes them annoyed or sad that they're not able to attend. I'm kind of the opposite. I'm actually already even seeing the show floor from the walkthroughs that I've already seen. I feel like it would be a pain. As somebody who only really is interested in going to shows like that, I would go there to try to buy something. That would be kind of something that I would definitely want to do. And I can imagine it getting really old really fast if the dealers that happen to have the stuff you want end up being, if one dealer is on one side of the thing and the other dealer is all the way in the news section, and maybe somebody else is somewhere in between, and you have to try to navigate these different areas around these crowds and everything. I could just see it being something that would make me extremely miserable. But for somebody else, I'm sure they would get a lot of enjoyment out of it. It's to each their own. It's one of those things. But I do want to say that for the folks that I do know that are going to be heading down there, safe travels. And hopefully it'll be a good trip down by plane, train, or automobile, whatever mode of transportation they end up using to it. And hopefully it's a good time. That's one of the big things that I want to see if it ends up being the case with all the different gatherings and all the different trade nights and different show things. And one of the ones that I mentioned a little bit here and there is there's going to be a wrestling card one as far as that's concerned. I think it's called the main event. So that's going to be one. And then there's going to be the regular trade night. And then probably there'll be a couple pop-up trade nights. How many and where they end up being. And these kind of things I think are going to be very interesting for the people that kind of prefer sitting back and doing a more people watching version of their national experience. And that's kind of the category that I find myself in. So I'm going to enjoy some people watching this upcoming week. So I think that'll be a lot of fun for me in that regard. And like I said, you'll get your full complement of content. If you were concerned that we weren't getting enough content, I think you will get your fill this upcoming week. So that's something I wanted to just talk about and talk about some of these other topics. That'll be it for me for now. So that is BIC podcast number 35. I think we won't come back for another one until August. So I'm trying to do about one a month. So we're at least able to hit that for the most part. If you are following on the YouTube channel, that is the hub for my content because I am making regular videos on there all the time. And we do live streams on Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And we will do that again this Friday. And as I mentioned, if we're able to get a little bit of live boots on the ground national coverage in there, we'll try to. Otherwise, we'll just chat about whatever people want to talk about as far as what's going on in the hobby, and we'll just hang out. And that'll be what we'll end up doing with that. Otherwise, if you're on the YouTube channel, more videos coming up on the channel. I already mentioned the live stream, so you're good there. If you are checking this out on the audio version, I'd love if you could do a review on Spotify, iTunes, or your podcast app of choice. The support, as always, is appreciated. And to close off, for the YouTube side, like if you like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you in the next one.